started. I guess a few people are stuck in traffic, but we'll get started. I would like to introduce Dr. Beth Cooper, and she'll be talking tonight about gaining ground connections between spirituality and mental health. Dr. Beth Cooper is a United Methodist elder for over 20 years. She has served local churches and campus ministries. She is a graduate of Duquesne University with a Master of Sacred Music and Master of Divinity degree from Perkins School of Theology at Southern Methodist University. So let's welcome Dr. Beth Cooper.
Well, I would like to thank the International Bipolar Foundation for inviting me to come and speak with you tonight. And I'd like to thank each one of you because ultimately we're all in this together, at least for the next 45 minutes. And so I want to be a resource. I am here obviously with training and religion. And can you hear me? Can't hear me? Can't hear me?
Can we turn on the house mics, please?
Is this better? Oh, wow. Okay. So other than saying thank you, I think we can move forward. So thank you for being here tonight. And what I would like to do, and I realize that we're all young at heart, but the age group that I primarily deal with is college age. And so whether you have young adults in your life or no, or if this can be a resource for future events or causes for the foundation, I hope this can be of use. But I also want you to just kind of adapt what it can be helpful to your own personal experience. And we'll just go from there. So there are going to be 3 things I'm going to talk about, and then it's all going to come together, I promise. And so we're going to kind of take a look at what it means to be a young adult, because whether we like to believe it or not, things have changed. And then we're going to take a look then about the faith community and the response from the faith community. And then we're also going to kind of touch on the university setting because things have changed there too. And then, of course, I'm here that if there are questions afterwards related to spiritual questions or to the topic or something that's come up, we'll have a Q&A afterwards. So, if I press the right button, we can get going. If you tend to take a look at young adult age, I'd like for you to think about it, your parents' or grandparents' age. Pretty much you looked at 18, 19, 21, people got married, had children, and the reality is that all experts tell us that with the young adult age, it has expanded. Did you all know that? It has expanded. And that the ages actually range from 17 to 29 years old. Some experts even say 17 to 31. I primarily don't get locked into the age because what's significant is that when you know that young adult age has ended, when the person reaches their first long-term relationship or long-term secure job. Make sense? How many can relate to this age group or yes. Sometimes when I have these conversations or lectures, I hear parents groaning in the back, that kind of thing. So, but yes. The other thing that I want people to realize too is that we have more people on college and university campuses than ever in the course of United States history. That is really, really important. We have more people on colleges and university campuses than ever in the course of history. With that said, the fastest growing subgroup of people attending college or university are students who experience mental illness. Did you know that? One of the statistics that comes from the and I love this book, and if you love to read, I suggest College of the Overwhelmed, the Campus Mental Health Crisis, and What We Know to Do About It. And it really tells you a lot about the connections and things related to young adults and mental health issues on campus. But one of the things that the authors point out is that the chances are almost 1 in 2 that a student will become depressed to the point of not being able to function. 1 in 2 that he or she will have a regular episode of binge drinking, and 1 in 10 that he or she will seriously consider suicide. Along with this, that I also wanted to say too that experts are saying that this is the first generation to be in college that will not live as long as their parents. That due to issues around obesity, stress related causes. Also, when they tend to look at the young adults that are in college now and what will be ahead of them, there will be 7 to 8 different job changes, most of them without health insurance. So something to really consider with all the conversations that you hear in the news today around health insurance. What does that mean for our young people, especially those who are vulnerable? Going to college or university is an exciting time in a young adult's life, but it's also a vulnerable time. Oftentimes, this is the first time a young adult is away from home. Factors that become barriers to young adults that go to college is lack of communication with support people, lack of routine, lack of 8 hours of sleep each day, alcohol or drugs, and high-pressure groups. One of the books that I love to use with young adults, and I understand that he spoke to the foundation already, is Facing Bipolar, the Young Adults Guide. And he talks about some of this. The importance of being able to have routine, make sure, to get sleep. And oftentimes when I work with young adults, sleep is the last thing on their minds. Now I'd like to talk just a little bit about the faith community's response. And again, adapt this to your situation. And then we can talk about some of this if you would like afterwards. Faith community's response, I'll put it this way. Oftentimes, and I'll use we can be the taillights instead of the headlights. Now, if I was in a congregation, I'd probably say amen. But you could say yes. But there is this sense that we have fallen short to knowing how to deal with people who have mental health concerns, or their families who have mental health concerns. So when we look at that, though, in relationship to young adults, we've fallen short there too. We haven't caught up to how we deal with the pipeline, how we deal with this age group that has extended itself, that hasn't got married, had kids. What do we do with that? And then we haven't kept up with technology or found a way to communicate and hold interest with young adults. We also have to understand, and when we work with young adults, that somehow faith has got to be more than entertainment. Religious education is based more on cultural backgrounds and family systems. I'd like for you to think about that. When it's based more on cultural background and family systems than it is on tools for fulfillment of life journey or coping through adversity. So when I talk about spirituality, what I'm talking about is being able to use those tools that are going to help you with your fulfillment of life journey and how it's going to help you to be able to cope through adversity. Faith communities are still behind in understanding factors with mental disabilities and how to understand or relate sacred text in a healthy way. And of course, I think we all know that sacred texts can be taken out of context or used for discrimination. Now, for the university system, I think it's important to also note that the university is set up to protect interests of the institution. As long as the student fits within the criteria of that context, the student goes through the system to obtain a degree. But when a student steps outside of the context of these policies, the university is equipped to protect itself from liability, not necessarily there to advocate for the student. And in several of the contexts, the university can even see it as a conflict of interest. Does that make sense? Parents of students who need special interests, it's most important not to assume anything. That with restructuring of institutions and cutbacks, there are and will be more people who will fall through the cracks. Because of privacy laws, parents and students need to have some kind of contract or some type of understanding to the what-ifs. So in case something does happen, there's something in place. If there is not a good relationship between parent and student, the student still has to have a top priority. There was, I'll give an example, a situation where a student was having problems. There was some mental health concerns, and on top of that, the parents were going through a divorce, and it was a bad divorce. And the husband wasn't going to pay for the daughter's tuition because he felt the wife should, the wife felt the husband should. So in the midst of all of this, the student was lost, and the university had to have the bills paid. And then it just even made the situation more dire. So we need to understand that whatever the relationship, the student has got to be the top priority. As each of you know, parenting doesn't stop when they go to college or university. My mother says, when I had you kids and you were small, you had small problems. As you get bigger, you have bigger problems. I don't know if that's true or not, but parenting obviously doesn't stop when your young adults go to college. And I think too, if we have learned anything with how competitive colleges and universities have gotten, put that aside, how competitive it is even in high school. Some might even say nursery school. But however the competition, success, yeah, it's about how hard the student works, but it's also about the support network that's in place for that student. Sitting for the university living outside the classroom, this talks a little bit about the age group, what's going on. Students are looking to gain independence. It's a time of further questioning and learning. Students are in a part of development where the focus is on me. Part of learning in this age period is to grow beyond this and see connections between neighbor, community, and world. And dependence grows to interdependence. Growth outside the classroom is just as important as growth inside the classroom. And this is the part where spirituality, in my opinion, is very important, because habits, rituals, and understandings are formed, whether based on truths or not. And so community service, student organizations, student jobs, mission trips, they're all important for the need of development. And how you establish your rituals, your habits, all these different things then become how you tend to direct the future in your life. I put this graph out here, and one of the exercises that I do, and pretty much I would do with anyone who would come to me and say, you know, things are pretty out of balance, I don't know what to do with myself, and I would say, okay, make a pie. And within a 24-hour period, how do you use your time? And so oftentimes what happens is in this pie is that, like, I'll get, and again, I'm dealing with young adults, I'll get classes, maybe a couple hours a day of classes. I'll get maybe X amount of time for eating. There'll be a lot of time for socializing, maybe work, and there'll be very minimal time for sleep, minimal time for all the other things. And so I asked them to think, within that pie, if you were to think about a strong core, you would have your physical health. And that would be exercising, working out, eating balanced meals, sleeping regularly. The body needs to be in motion. And oftentimes, the age group that I deal with, a lot of them are doing this. But then when it comes to emotional health or mental health, it starts to really lack. And so what do I mean by that? The mental health is the intellectual stimulus. It supports people who nurture and care. It's being able to bend without breaking, being able to say no when needed and hear no and respect it. And then emotional health would be the healthy relationships, not letting emotions run your life or feeling lost in them, being able to feel without being numb. And then spiritual health, and I think it is very important. It's right on up there. And I think some experts that come from faith backgrounds would also say it's the crust that gels all this together. But however you want to see it, I invite you to think about what that would look for you. And I would say that spiritual health is about being able to engage in ritual and forward movement to help get you to the next part of life. Asking questions that get beyond blame and isolation. It's also about honoring life passages. And as much disconnect that we have, as much as, it used to be we had extended family, what does that mean to be able to honor life passages? Those things in your life that are important. Something to think about. So I was thinking about how this might look, and again, this might not be for everyone, but I invite you, before you enter college or before you entered your job or whatever that might look like, what was the context? And I would say you would, again, talking about students, that's students in the middle, and then the family. And then the school, neighborhood, and community. Life in college, for a lot, then becomes the student, the friends in different sub-communities, and then the college or university. And so there is that change there. So when we deal with life changes, you could put that with other things, like you go from one job to another job, or maybe you're moving from one part of the country to the other. What's interesting now is the social networking. Looking at the student and then having the social networking, and then family, friends, school, and everything else. Experts say that the average amount of time that young adults spend on computers is 6 to 8 hours every day. And keep in mind, that's usually multitasking. Now, this could be a different graph, but just something to think about, because growth towards maturity is that interdependence kind of stuff. And so some might have the higher living source in the middle, and then the other things around, or but just for the sake of showing what that means, that it's beyond who we are. Sometimes when we experience trauma or some type of life-altering deal, you know, it's the mean stuff, but then it's that sense of understanding, you know, that it's all in the giving, and it's in this communal response, this sense of interdependence. So, potholes that can slow down spiritual healthiness for the young adult. Assumption that when young adult leaves their faith, they will come back. Statistics show that most won't. Trauma and addictions will halt growth. Recovery must also search and question faith issues. Distractions in life can take over, and one can become not present to the moments of life and aid to a direction to things that aren't important. So, you know, does anyone have any questions with that, or does that resonate, or?
Does it hold true for no matter what faith it is? Is it any one faith more subject to than another?
I think it's pretty universal that if a student leaves the setting, goes off to school, I think there's this assumption that when school's done, we'll come back. And what research is showing is that usually the distractions or whatever takes place, it forms the habits, it forms whatever the young adult chooses to be a part of. And then there is that sense that they don't come back. Some do, most don't.
Have you seen any statistics, what percent?
I can't remember the percentage. Do you know?
I thought I'd seen something about 90 or 95%.
Yeah,
If they leave.
Yeah, it's pretty high.
I really like the way, for me, this is an aha moment, the way you link together faith with spirituality. Because in my frame, I always think about faith as more kind of religious,
Mhm.
and I think we're all coming to realize that spirituality is also a religion, like, in the context of something bigger than ourselves.
Mhm.
You know, I can remember years ago people would kind of go, spirituality, what, you know?
Mhm.
And we're not saying that anymore, are we?
I think how it's being defined is that when people say religious, and some of this is generational, I realize, but it tends to be an understanding of supporting a type of religion, as opposed to saying spiritual that might be outside the box. But I know a lot of religious people who are spiritual, so I don't want us to judge or define what that might look like. I think we still need to be open, because after all, it's about the journey, right? And it's about having grace for one another, right? Whatever our faiths might be. Make sense? Okay. Now, UCLA did research on spirituality in young adult. And what they found was the biggest trend found among students was the importance of prayer. The two declines of this trend were among students who drink and party. Research showed that indeed most students were asked the big questions of life and wanting to actively search for these inner meanings. Students saw a difference between religion and spirituality. I didn't know if we could actually go on it and do the YouTube thing, so if you would like to know the website, it's spirituality.ucla.edu, but the authors who actually did the research also wrote a book called Cultivating the Spirit. And again, you can do either one and see the whole process. And it's actually really incredible because it'll tell you about our young people right now. It was a very wide search. I think it was over 10 years. Don't quote me on that. But it was many years. And so the study really showed a lot. And what I liked about their definition of spiritual development was it's about how students make meaning of their education in their lives, how they develop a sense of purpose, the value and belief dilemmas that they experience, as well as the role of religion, sacred, and the mystical in their lives. And I even put a YouTube deal up there if you like, but you can just put it in and you can pick what you like. There's some wonderful interviews on there. So for the young adult who's going to college, why spirituality? And again, relate this to your own life. How will you handle these factors at school? How would you handle them with your family? How would you handle them at your home, your job, the world? And so what you're looking at is stress, difficult people. How many people have difficult people in their lives? I want to know where you live. Different ways of doing things. And I think for one of the biggest barriers for young adults is different ways of belief. So, you have, such wisdom, you're 18 years old, you've been told one way or whatever, you go to school, and then all of a sudden you realize, well, wait a minute, have I been told something different? Or, are there maybe different ways to get to the same answer or conclusion? And so this cognitive dissonance, figuring it out and coming through not only an awareness and kind of a grieving process, but then a recovery or a resolution of it. Being in charge of one's own actions and choices. If I had $1 every time I heard it was somebody else's fault, I'd be very rich right now. Facing people and circumstances that don't always have your best interest. Facing life challenges, how to make finances meet. Limitations, failures, trauma or violence, being told no or having to say no. A lot of people have a hard time being able to say no. And with that said, there are a lot of people that can't hear no. Death of friends and or family members, sickness, illness, being misunderstood or embarrassed. Body image. Lots of research done on body image. And the big question, who am I? What do I fear and why? Break up with girlfriend or boyfriend. Another big question, what do I believe? Can I make a difference? Sexuality, what am I good at, or what do I have passion for? What is happiness? So, when this all, gets brought up and people are kind of putting their maps out there, what then also begins to happen is values and goals. You kind of have to lay it down on the road. Well, what are your values? And sometimes it gets messed up with what are your goals? And there's a difference. Values are your desired qualities of ongoing action. In other words, your values describe how you want to behave as a human being. Your goals are your desired outcomes. In other words, once you've completed your goal, it's done. And then you move on. Research shows that people that understand that do far better in success than not. So I thought it was important to put up there about the difference between values and goals, how that's looked at, and then to try and understand what your values might be. And so your values are your infrastructure or your compass. Your values frame not only how we are going to pursue our journey, but what direction we're going to go. Your values give you meaning and purpose. The goals are the action. It's the importance of how we frame our goals. So now I'd like to take a look at when you add mental health concerns to the equation. Whatever you name your higher source, God, Yahweh, Jehovah, whatever that might be, I will say God from my faith background. And again, this is my opinion, but I believe that God does not create anything that has no meaning or is irrelevant. The second thing that I want to...
I'm not understanding that
Okay.
phrase.
Mm-hmm.
So, can you say it a different way?
Mm-hmm. There is no human being that does not have value. All human beings have value.
Now it makes sense. See, I'm just reading along. Can I ask you to go back to values and goals? I'm not sure about it. You said they're interchangeable.
No?
You said they're confused, sometimes confused.
Sometimes they're, yeah. Like when you have a conversation about, what do you want to do? Or people will list their goals, but not necessarily their values. And they're not interchangeable because your values, let's back up, not that far. Your values are the infrastructure.
So is that your spirituality, essentially?
Yeah. And then what you want to do with that are what you have in place are your goals. And so what's important with that is that if you only think of your goals, and there are going to be times when you don't make your goals, you're going to be an unhappy person. But if your goals can be structured within your value system, your spirituality, your happiness is derived from your belief system, not from what you produce.
That's very clear. Thank you.
Any other questions? The second part is students that come to college with mental health concerns need to seek out appropriate professionals and supportive people to help with the student's unique context related to the questions that will come up during college life. The third point, well, let me go back. Let me just say something really brief. When we are facing in the state of California, especially in the state system, another $100 million cut, which means there will be even less teachers. The classes are already big. The sense of individual attention, one-on-one, I mean, there are going to be people who fall through the cracks. One has to be intentional, especially if there are special needs or concerns, that a network, something's in place to help that student through that. And even more so than ever, when we have so many people on college campus, and now there's going to be even more cuts. It's going to be very difficult, especially for those that come with special concerns. Make sense? Yes?
So what I hear you saying is that because of the number of students and the reduction in teachers, we can't rely on the campus to support our children's mental health issues. And this is why spirituality is important, because that gives an additional layer of protection or a resource for the students. Spirituality, church family.
Yes. And realizing that faith communities don't always do well either, but one needs to find those communities that can help. Yes. Yes. I would also say too that God is bigger than any question, doubt, or anger. Spirituality, like any other discipline, requires reflection, community, learning, listening, and action. We're called to move beyond a kindergarten understanding of faith and one's existence in the world. Right? Right? Okay, well, I guess I made that one really clear.
And are you saying for that, when I applied it to myself, that means we just don't go to church every Sunday. We should do the Bible study. We should do the spirit, just the spirituality. Because I have a 5-year-old daughter that goes to Sunday school.
Mm-hmm.
And so, don't just stop learning in Sunday school, but as a parent, set an example of continued learning and understanding of faith.
Yes. Just a little bit about my background. I didn't realize that I was weird. I am a Generation Xer, and I did go to church every Sunday, and didn't know that was weird until I went to high school and realized that I was one of the few that actually did go to church. But what I was taught early on, my faith has evolved age appropriately. It's important for people who have either stopped or that you still evolve. You still think about, and you wrestle with questions. You wrestle, you learn your addition, your subtraction. You're not throwing algebra your first step, but eventually you do grow into other fields. It's the same with your faith. And that's what gives it its richness. That's what helps in your process. At times things are, simplicity is good, especially when you're in the midst of conflict. But part of the foundation, the pillars that help in that faith, is the group discussions, maybe the arguments or the debates, because it helps you to question and to think through things, and much better to do it in times when you're not in crisis, so that you can have that in place, that then when something tough does happen, it's there. So I'll give an example. If I'm having a tough day, I might remember a verse from one of my sacred texts, or a hymn that was sung, that I've had, that gives me comfort. But my understanding of what I believe in has evolved from what I understood when I was 5 years old. Makes sense? Okay. When I deal with young people who have had some sense of trauma in their life, or they might have to come to terms with that they've just been diagnosed with something and they're just trying to get around it, there is a very natural response called anger. And it's okay to be angry as long as it's appropriate. And so there are some, and I'll just use people because this is universal, that feel that God can't handle that. You can't be angry at God. I'll tell you a funny story. I remember I was pastoring a small church, and one of the women had found out that, she had the life of Job. It was amazing what this poor woman had gone through. And she just finally found that she just had to get angry at God, and she didn't know what to do with herself because she was kind of nervous about it. And so she went out in her backyard and she hugged this big tree. She hung on it and she just yelled and screamed at God and was hugging this tree, and then it helped her feel better. And I remember her saying to me, "Do you think it's okay to do that? Do you think that..." And so I asked her, "Well, how do you feel about that?" It's not about how I feel. It's about, does this help you? I wouldn't do it during a thunder and lightning storm. But And to be able to find the humor in that. But what's important is to have that process. And God is bigger than all of that. It truly is about the journey. You wouldn't want to get caught and not being able to move forward. And if that's what you need to do to have some kind of response to work it through, it's more important about learning something from it so you can move forward. What do you do when bad things happen? Well, you don't give up. Spirituality is helpful because in the memorizing the sacred texts, music, quotes, they're all helpful to remind us that we are not the first or the last to experience such a situation. Our time at college is a very short time. I think this is really important, and you could make this adaptable to your situation with what might ever be. You have your life, and these individual episodes are merely this small compared to life. So your time at college is a short time related to the rest of your life. So keep things in perspective. And I tell young people all the time, care about your character, not your reputation. Care about your character, not your reputation. Your character is what you build. Reputation is what others perceive. It will change upon the interpreter. Yes? Any response? Any?
That is powerful.
If parents look what you were saying about values and goals, it's really great. I really appreciate the way that you framed all of this. Makes so much sense.
I just want to, my brother committed suicide 6 years ago. 3 weeks later, I got pregnant. We got an abortion diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. So when we say memorize sacred texts, they tattooed on my arm Ephesians 6:10 through 20, because I think about killing myself every day because I'm bipolar, and I have bipolar, and I just think it's been very important to me with my daughter. We talk about never giving up. Like, she watched Romeo and Juliet, she watched Titanic. And so I think that at 5 years old, we can have a discussion about don't kill yourself like a boy. I just think that I'm so happy that I'm seeing this and seeing that these things that I'm instinctually trying to instill in her because of my brother's suicide are going to hopefully come to fruition if she's still around, 2 years from now.
Any other response? Yes?
There's a book out that I heard about from KPBS Maynard. He says he liked the title, but it goes along with this. It says, "Your opinion of me is frankly none of my business."
I like that.
Probably should.
That's pretty good. On a bad day, and you will have bad days, but they're only bad days. I mean, again, keep it, and if you can't, your support network constantly remind. On a bad day, you will have bad days. Don't get lost in victimhood. Yes, you have this or you might have that, but get beyond asking the why to asking what can I do with this and how can I move forward. And I know that's tough. Be flexible. When goals might seem too impossible, change the goals. That will help you get closer to the bigger goal. It's okay to change things. Again, this is about the journey. If along the way the goal isn't so important, reevaluate. That's okay too. Learn and move forward. Now, if a student comes to me and he or she has changed his major 20 times, I might say, okay, we might want to take a look and see how we might do this a little bit differently. But nevertheless, it's about the journey. Oftentimes, there are several ways to get to the same location. Any response? Makes sense?
I love being flexible.
Yes.
You know, you find being flexible is your best friend at times.
Yes, absolutely.
You know,
Right.
and I love that as I've matured, and you can share this with the young people in your life too, that by being flexible, setting an example about being flexible, that it's not the end of the world, and what's the worst thing that can happen?
Mhm.
I had one of my counselors teach me that long ago, and I said, that's just, it sounds funny, but what's the worst thing that can happen? You know, from minute to minute, moment to moment, you know?
Mhm. Mhm. Being able to be flexible and learning not to break. Yes. So, being spiritually fit, you like how I put that? Everybody talks about being physically fit. Okay, so being spiritually fit is important. It's important for day-to-day living. It's important for balance. It's important for building of relationships and community. It's important to how to deal with those things that are hate-filled or negative. It's important for purpose. And I ask you, why is it important to be spiritually fit? What is your response?
I think it gives us protection and armor against the world that we live in and the things that we come across.
When I'm not spiritually fit, nothing is right in my day. There's nothing that seems right.
Yes?
You need to stay spiritually fit so that when you take the wrong North Torrey Pines Road and get late to this place, focus.
That's right. I call my guru Ashley over there and ask her how to get here. I did the same thing, yes.
6 wonderful university students. I stopped and asked them, and they got out their phone and showed me how to get back here. And got here right away after that.
Yes.
Does being spiritually fit necessarily mean or believing in God?
It's a good question.
What was the question? Believing.
Does spiritually fit mean believing in God? When you say God, are you saying God as in a name, a higher source, or the whole thing?
Well, depends what you mean by the whole thing.
I'm asking you. I'm trying to understand the question.
Well, God being a superior being is something greater than us. For instance, you can have individuals who are morally good people. I mean, people who are together have problems, people who follow everything here, but happen not to believe in God.
Great question.
You know what the wonderful thing about, and again, when you talk about faith, everybody has a different answer. Even people who participate in different denominations, because your spirituality is about your experience, and it's your reflection on your experience. When you say theology, it is the study of God. So, I mean, technically, if one was to engage in a theological conversation, it would be about some type of conversation about God. But when you talk about being spiritually fit, and your question is, does it have to be about God? When you talk about human beings, you know, when I talk about those layers, how would that then evolve? What would that look like? I can only talk about my experience. When I think about being spiritually fit, and I'm having a really bad day, I don't want to put that experience in something that's finite or might have just as many problems as me, also have bad days because it would be my bad moment to catch that person on a bad day. That's having a bad moment. So for me, being spiritually fit would be that sense of mysticism, that sense of that higher being that I can find comfort in. But that's my experience, and that's part of my journey. I can share that with you. But for me, what's important is where you're at and what your questions are and how you might reflect or work and process that so that it can mean something for you. But none of this is cookie cutter stuff. It drives me crazy when people make it cookie cutter stuff. It's not that easy. If it was that easy, it wouldn't be that meaningful. You know what I mean? Know what I mean? Okay. Yes.
I think that's a great question, because I have only in my adult life come to see that there's a difference between religion and spirituality, and I had a lot of negative experiences with specific religions, and I'm coming to the conclusion that they are related, but that a God or a higher being, it's still a journey for me, but I think there's, for me, it's like something deep inside me. Maybe for me that's where God is or something, I don't know. But when I read about other religions, because we tend to focus more on, I think, the Judeo-Christian religions, but when I read about Hinduism or Buddhism, or I learned just to meditate for stress and things like that. It's sort of starting to come together for me. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I understand what you're saying. Do you have to have, what was it you said?
Well, for instance, I believe myself to be spiritual. Okay. But I don't depend on God really for anything. Okay. What I believe is that I must take care of the situation. Do I believe in something superior to me? I have no doubt in my mind that there is. But when I'm in trouble or that sort of thing, I do not depend on that being to assist me. I depend on myself to pull myself out of that situation.
So what I'm hearing is that there might be an understanding that when you have this relationship with this higher being, that it might feel like enabling, or it might feel like a dependence. And what I'm talking about isn't any of that. My understanding of my relationship with God would be more of that interdependence kind of thing that I'm talking about. And in that interdependence, there might be times when I might have to depend, but it isn't an enabling. Isn't theology amazing? When you think of how people have had conversations and debates and arguments, I mean, in a good way, and how it further continues the reflection, and we learn something from each other, which is really, really important. I believe that, if you were to take a look at what books said all of this stuff was, it tended to come from one race, one gender, kind of one experience. And I think the wonderful times that we live in now is that we have more people at the table that are talking about their experiences. And so, we have women and men, we have people from different races, we have people from different religions, we have people from recovery, we have people who have mental health issues, physical health issues. And that's why, sometimes I say we gotta check what we've learned and come back at it with maybe an understanding of how sacred texts have been distorted or have been used to put people down. Because there is a lot of hurt in that and a lot of grief. And re-examine what the actual languages are saying, or maybe what the culture of the times were, what the customs, all those things are important. I'll give an example. In domestic violence. So many women coming from faith backgrounds, and again, I'll use my faith tradition, which is Christianity. And they would say, well, I was told I needed to forgive. Well, if we take a look at that response, the church has made that the first step. And now, people are going back and saying, you know what? That's really a misinterpretation. It needs to be the last step. When it's the first step, you create the enabling. But when there is a sense of accountability, a sense of justice, a sense of accountability, and then a sense that there has been a change, then that last step of forgiveness. However, it is up to the timing of the victim to hold whether that's necessary or not. And so we need to re-examine what all of this means. And the excitement isn't necessarily knowing the answers, but sharing in the struggle. Because that in itself is life-giving. Makes sense?
And for me, that's godlike.
Mm-hmm.
Because I grew up in this construct of God, you know, he used to make faces and draw him like a person, he, she. And someone much wiser than myself years ago challenged me and said, you know, the sum total of the parts is greater than the whole. And so two people coming together, it's greater than myself, and that's an energy that's created that's bigger than I could possibly create.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so it was like, I got it. So that's, you know, I feel God in that. Does that make any sense?
Mm-hmm. I had a young person who had come to me suffering with all kinds of issues, and then had to deal with depression and just this whole idea of spirituality and what that means, and the more and more we talked, the more and more it came back to this understanding of God being judgmental, God being, you know, this punitive kind of person, feeling shame and all those kinds of things. When that could all be sorted out, and thinking of God in many different ways, I think it's problematic when we refer to God as Father all the time. Because our young people, it's okay to use the image, and again, this is just my opinion, for what it's worth, but when you just use that one image, and that's all you use, there will be people who will not be able to understand that type of relationship because that's all they think they can have. So if our language is finite, and what we're talking about is something way beyond our language, we need to explore what all these different images are so that we can further grow in what our relationship is with God. Any other questions? Is this helpful? Being any young adult at college, find student organizations that are going to respect who you are, in which you find joy serving in that organization. So, whatever you do, be in a group you're going to actually find joy and passion. Who you are is a gift, and every aspect of you is important. Your being is important. Test the waters before you share any part of that gift with others. Campus ministries can be important to your spiritual life, but be smart about it. Don't join a group that's going to take sacred texts to beat you down. Each human being is made in the image of God. So faith communities can be important to your spiritual life, but be smart about it. Spirituality is a part of the journey of learning and growing. And then I just was going to end the presentation with Parker J. Palmer is a person who talks about life stages, the development of different life stages. And he says, our deepest calling is to grow into our own authentic selfhood. Whether or not it conforms to some image of who we ought to be. As we do so, we will not only find the joy that every human being seeks, we will also find our path of authentic service in the world. So if there's any other questions, I'll be glad to at least give you my opinion on it. Yes?
Thank you. I was, in fact, just reflecting on your stages of the being spiritually fit. And oftentimes I think of it as like a marathon, and you have your purpose, that was your fifth one, the purpose, where you're going, where you're headed.
Mm-hmm.
And being like, if you have to do those exercises, like you said, from our own experiences, good, bad, and ugly along the way, like charting our course, and we get off course and we hit 16 miles, but the exercises we do each day, that daily walk, that help us to when the storm does come. And there's storms every day.
Mm-hmm.
We live in the world. And so it's just keeping spiritually fit is taking that one day at a time and those exercising those spiritual muscles to keep us grounded for what's ahead, and be there to strengthen others along the way as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what's helped me, is keeping that purpose and that goal. And I did grow up with a father when I was 6 years old. They said he was going to live 4 months because he had cancer. He lived 27 years to see 23 of his grandchildren. And I was number 6 out of 8 children, but it was my home. Church was my home. I'd go ride my bike every morning. That was my peace. That was my heaven on earth. That was my comfort. That was my experience. I had a safe haven of love and joy, and knowing that I was covered and my Father was covered, whether it was here or in heaven. So there is that exercise that we, in those growing pains we have throughout life, and the testing of the water, when you do hit that 16th mile, that 16th year of adolescence, that is part of that help that helps you get beyond those walls that are ahead. And as we get older in life, marathon doesn't get easier as we further along, but it does. The spiritual health will help carry the distance. For me, that's what's helped me grow each day. And raising children in a culture that is very corrupt and it's confusing. And that in the counseling, and whether I've been in third world countries, but it's the same. You've been growing up with the love and the nurture and the care from a home, and there's this chasm that has gotten deeper and wider and faster to how they're to survive in this culture, to be responsible adults. And so as adolescents, you go through that, and in life we all go through this, but it's very difficult and confusing in the world, whether you live in North County, San Diego, or you live in Bosnia, to how do you survive and thrive in this world.
I would say 3 things. If we had a universal understanding of first, do no harm, it would be a much happier world. Do no harm. 3 easy words. I had a student one time say to me, sometimes I don't know the difference between right or wrong. And sometimes things are that complicated where there might be 2 rights or 1 wrong or 3 wrongs, or maybe you can't ever find the right. And I'm saying those times or situations, do no harm. Do no harm. The second part that I have grave concern for, and I struggle with this every day because it's so blatant, is the sense of being raised to say that the truth is important, and we are a country that's producing more about how to avoid liability than to tell the truth. And so it's complicated when there's those two different mission statements or different ways of how you do life. And the third part is that I just kind of wanted to say, along with your experience of running the marathon, that 16th mile, I don't know about you, but I don't know if I'll ever even reach the 6th mile, let alone the 16th mile, but sometimes that 16th mile could just be a walk around the block, and that's okay. So I'm just trying to find different images or metaphors for you to resonate with, that it's okay on a bad day when that once around the block thing feels like the 16th mile. But the important part is that you did that one block, and there's tomorrow. And it is about moving forward. Any other questions? Thank you.